And this is our Futurism panel discussion. This is something we'd like to do here at the Genre Committee. The last time we did it was 2019? 2019. It was pre-pandemic. It was a very large crowd. And this is a very large crowd too. But that was a different time. Futurism was different, right? We have two panelists who are reoccurring, meaning they came back. they understood the future, and we needed to have them here. And we have two new ones. And so I'm Dwayne Johnson Cochran. I'm the chair of the committee. Kelly Jo Brick is my vice chair, and we are here today to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here. Kelly Jo?
Yeah, the genre committee, we champion all things genre. It could be sci-fi, horror, it can be rom-com. So we would love to have you come join us for our committee. Our next meeting is, no fooling, it's April 1st, right here at the Guild, but it's also hybrid, so you can, pop in on Zoom. Unfortunately, one of the panelists wasn't able to make it tonight, Erin McDonald. She sends her regrets. She came down with a flu bug, but she said it's a dream of hers to speak with the WGA. We hope to have her in the future because she loved to share her unique intersection of theoretical astrophysics and genre writing. So a few quick thank yous. First of all, to Greg, our Guild liaison. He is awesome. He does so many amazing things behind the scenes to make all these events happen. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the committee for the people who kind of stepped up and helped with this event, and to the Science and Entertainment Exchange. If as a writer you're ever looking for resources, they're super helpful. They're a great place to turn. And then big thank you to our panelists for coming out, sharing their time and just their knowledge and experiences. It's always an inspiring evening. And many thanks to Kira Snyder for stepping in and becoming our moderator. It's going to be a fun evening. Get ready with all kinds of science questions you have as they bring into these things that are just going to blow our minds. So without further ado, Kira, take it away.
Everybody, how are you doing tonight? Everyone good? Good. Hey, Zoom. Thank you, Dwayne, Kelly, the committee, Guild staff, and volunteers. And thank you and welcome to our panelists, who I will introduce in just a moment. But first, just a quick show of hands. Are people familiar with the term protopia? Okay, a few people. All right. So dystopias we are increasingly familiar with, shall I just say? And we work on them hello. So yeah, dystopias, we are very familiar with those, right? So they're compelling to watch, they're compelling to write, to work on. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that. They're kind of fun, scary what-if scenarios. How would I behave? What would I do in these kinds of situations? They can be kind of dark escapism. You might be having a bad day, but at least you're not being chased by zombies. So that's an upside. And as storytellers, they're just very natural engines of conflict and drama. The stakes are very high. You can sort of see why audiences and writers, we as writers, really like dystopias. But we're also wired to like those kinds of things, right? So cognitive science tells us that we look for the bad in things. That's why it leads is a real thing. It's something that gets weaponized by marketers, by politicians. It's an ancient evolutionary survival technique. Looking for the bad is how we stay alive. But what happens when that imagery gets reinforced over and over again is that it actually does rewire our brains. It makes it harder to imagine something positive, imagining a positive future. So it's kind of, if you can see it, you can be it, but for society. So utopias they can be boring, which is obviously bad for writers. They're also kind of perfect, and that means they're impossible. But a protopia, and that's a term that futurists use, it was coined by Kevin Kelly, who is the co-founder of Wired magazine, among other things. And a protopia is a term that envisions a future that is positive. It's not perfect, but today, it's better than today, better than yesterday. And so, the Star Trek universe is a great example of a protopia. Plenty of high stakes, plenty of drama, plenty of conflict, but it is putting forth a vision of the future that isn't perfect. We're human, we create things that are imperfect, but it is a more positive vision of the future. So how do we get to protopias, right? Lots of ways to get to dystopias. How do we get to protopia? And that's where these folks come in. Protopias, you get there by innovation, by hope, and by innovation powered by hope, which is the theme of some of their talks. So you have their bios in your program, so I'm not gonna read those. So just briefly, I'll introduce them, and then we'll get to their terrific talks. We have 3 great talks for you tonight. So I'll introduce them first, and then we'll get going. So we have with us Travis Chapa, Ph.D. He is the program lead for Capricorn Biotherapeutics, and he's a former LA City Health Commissioner. Welcome, Travis. We have Amy Parish, Ph.D., who is a primatologist and biological anthropologist. Welcome, Amy. And we have Randii Wessen, astronautics system engineer and the lead study architect for JPL's Innovation Foundry's A-team. Oh, PhD. And actually, some years ago, Randii actually worked on a show that I worked on called The 100. We consulted Randii to figure out how to deorbit a space station without killing everybody on board, and he very kindly helped us to basically figure out how it might work. So thank you very much for that. So first up, we have Travis, and Travis will be talking about the science of hope, how biotech is shaping a brighter future. Welcome, Travis.
Couple of clicks. Give me a sec. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is good. Close. Okay. So yeah, you have heard the introduction. So my PhD is in molecular microbiology and microbial pathogenesis, but I know a lot about genetics and general cell biology, things that I use now in my career in biotechnology to make innovative therapies, mostly for cancer, but nowadays I've been doing genetic diseases. The current one is Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I'll talk about some of the very exciting things we're doing with that. So the title of the talk's maybe a little more exciting than the content's going to be. I couldn't quite figure out how to land the plane on that original idea. And I came back to realizing that actually modern current science is much more advanced than we think it is, and is actually already pretty exciting. And so I think I'm going to baseline on that. And some of the idea behind my talk is everybody's always looking for a representation of themselves in film, and I'm always trying to look for representation of scientists in film, but it turns out I'm always creating a zombie apocalypse or something pretty devastating to the world, which I've never not done one time in my life, right? So I put these up here, and maybe I thought I was going to talk about them longer, but I have no desire to go into them deeper at this point. But the idea is it's always generally disasters. All innovation and technology seems to be bad and dystopic and catastrophic, and always pandemics following that. And so that's not been my experience with science. And I think, in fact, a lot of us have not had that experience. Maybe some of us pine for the Oregon Trail days where you were being driven by horses and dying of basic bacterial infections. But I think now we all like technology and what it's doing, and very little of it is resulting in a worldwide disaster. And so more of what I was hoping to convey is just trying to normalize science as being a general positive force in films. And I think part of my trouble with landing the plane was it results in a utopia, which she established in the beginning is not what we're going for. There's not a lot of conflict or issues in utopia. There's no story there really. But yeah, so I couldn't figure a plan on that. So I figured if I just talk about modern day science and talk about the ethical dilemmas that are there and the conflicts that arise there, that's better for driving stories and it's still positive. So I think the idea is just to normalize science. So make it the focus of the story, make it a thing that's happening that characters are grappling with in their own journeys, growing, coming of age, whatever the case is. It doesn't always have to be high school or romantic comedies in the office. That's my idea. And so I understand why we gravitate towards fear and disasters, because it sells tickets. As we were saying, it's very exciting. Everybody likes to see that kind of stuff on screen. But I do think we're missing some opportunities to look at how science in general is still affecting people in their journeys, just in a less dramatic way than the blockbusters might imply. So unfortunately, I dug pretty long to find just those 4 movies at the bottom that sort of represent science in a relatively positive light. And even Big Hero 6, it's kind of a stretch because the idea is that Baymax is a medical robot, right? It's technically a technology that they use to become a superhero. And so I took it as a win. Science. So just going into this quick table before I jump into actual science of just my experience of watching Hollywood films and the reality of what I do when I'm in a lab, right? And so gene editing, genetic editing, do it all the time, and it cells, bacteria, human cells, mice, things all the time. I've never created a monster or anything that would be escape the lab and cause disaster, but we have created cures for like birth defects and things that, you know, you're worried to have a kid because it has a recessive genetic gene that we can get rid of now, right? In real life, that's not the future, right? AI development, I won't go in that. We don't do software or hardware, but we do use AI to drive science innovation. So it used to take 20 scientists 5 years to do some of the stuff that AI can do in like a couple of weeks, right? And so none of it has resulted in AI overlords or anything that seemed to be at risk of generating that. Neural implants is a really good one, right? The instinct is that this is going to be mind control. Somebody's going to tap into it and hack it. But in general, all of this has been just used for prosthetic limbs, right? And being able to actually control hands, legs, curing paralysis almost at this point. That's what those neural implants are doing at this point. Improving memory, potentially combating Alzheimer's. Those are what I've experienced neural implants doing, not so much the other thing. And then viral research is a big one. We just had a big pandemic, so I think it's on everybody's mind that the zombie apocalypse could happen. Right, we've seen the evidence of what it might look like. But in my experience, all of our research is generally used to design vaccines and therapies. Again, we've never created a zombie. So I think the idea is that all of these big catastrophic events, creating all of these disasters is very exciting for storytelling, but actually just thinking about the science we have right now in real life creates relatable stories, right? And it's also something that people can actually understand as being possible as opposed to the flying car futures that we often see in films. And so I'm going to go to the next slide. This was just kind of me giving my non-writer opinions about what you might be able to do with optimistic storytelling, but I'll leave it to you guys. You guys don't need my opinions on that. So some of the reason that people like doing those big catastrophic futures is because the science is exciting, right? It's like, oh, what if we had this very far away concept where, you know, cancer is completely cured and that creates some kind of classism or something like this? Well, I think part of the reason people don't realize how advanced we already are in a lot of our biotechnology medicines is because unless you get a disease or unless you have the condition or a family member has a condition, you're never really asking about this stuff. And a lot of people aren't looking it up casually as part of their hobby. There's a lot of wild innovations that we already have that people aren't familiar with. And I'm going to just present 4 of the ones I think are really exciting at the moment. So CRISPR and genetic medicine. This one we've all heard of. It's been around for more than a decade at this point. It's come up, but I think the extent of what we're doing with it is maybe not completely public. At the time, the debate was designer babies, right? The idea is like you can make a basketball player now if you wanted one, but we're not there yet, right? The genes are pretty complicated. That's not the relationship we understand. It's really more about simple diseases like sickle cell, muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis, things where we know a single gene is the reason that the disease exists, that we can actually swap the gene for a perfect brand new set of genes in the embryo, and the child is born never even knowing that they had it. That can be done right now. We don't do it because ethically we're still figuring out how we feel about that as a society, but it's a thing that we can do. That medicine exists today, right now, and the minute we get around the ethics around how we want to handle society, we can start implementing stuff like that. Even crazier is you can do it in an adult while they're already alive and fix something that they have. That can happen right now. And I think we're on our way to trying to do that because that you can consent as an adult and such. So I think it's just a matter of figuring out how the policies work around that. But that is a real thing that exists right now that we can do. We do this kind of thing in mice, right? You can change the color of the hair, eye color, things like this. It's interesting. It's disturbing, but it's interesting. And so this is truly a thing that we can already do. It's not as far in the future as you think it might be. And you can build stories around this right now. Right. And it sounds like it's futuristic, but it's not. They're doing it at UCLA. It's not even like a government lab or something. This is something they can do right now anywhere. The brain-computer interfaces for restoring movement. I think this is a big one. We've heard about it. You've seen, oh yeah, right. The images would have been animated. I forgot. I made it a PDF. So now they're just on there. So that's okay. So there was no image for the CRISPR one. I guess it's buried. But the image at the top there is Karen. Her hands, you can see the meticulous movement of being able to pick up a grape with her mind. This is a prosthetic hand that's tied to her brain, moving as if she's thinking about moving her right hand. And that's having the effect that it does. We have this kind of thing times, that was 3 years ago, and this is only amplified since this time has occurred. So we're going to be very close to curing, not curing, but being able to supplement people who are paralyzed. All limb losses can be taken care of. We're even able to start, you'll get to the last point, growing eyes and making improvements towards people who have blindness that's specific to the organ failure. So again, brain-computer interfaces, huge advancement in biotechnology, and this stuff is taking off pretty rapidly. I think it really just took a matter of having an example like this before everybody realized it was possible, right? The idea is like the first person who ran a marathon took a very long time, and then everybody after that's been breaking the record ever since. Same thing with science. When somebody does it once, everybody else can start doing it faster. The cancer immunotherapy. So this is the thing I find very exciting. This is something I don't think any of us really ever thought about in science, and I don't think we think about a lot now in society. So this is the cure for cancer, true cure for cancer, not an overstatement. Is the cure for cancer? It's just going to take a while to do all of the cancers. Since anybody who's familiar with cancer, they're all different, and in each individual person, they are all different. And so it still takes a little while. But right now, what we observed is the body is very good at protecting you in general. You take breaths all the time of germs, and you don't get sick that much, right? Maybe you get sick 3 or 4 times a month if you get sick a lot, but that's not every day. And you're assaulting yourself nonstop with germs. Your body's pretty robust at getting rid of things that are causing you ailment. The only time you really need antibiotics or something like this is when your system's overwhelmed. And even then, they just level the playing field. Your immune system is still what clears those infections out. We learn for cancer, it's the same. So your cells are always dividing, and your body is error prone. It makes mistakes all the time. You're creating cancer all the time in your body, but you have a defense system, your immune system, same cells that we've been studying. We just didn't realize that they did this other stuff. You have immune cells that clear cancer cells out of your system. Now, when you have the kind of cancers that are a big deal you go to the doctor for, it's because you're overwhelmed. Either the cancer grew too fast or it's camouflaged in some way that your body's unable, your general surveillance system, to recognize it. We now have CAR T immunotherapies. It took us a while, but we found the cells that do this. We can take them out of your body, we can amplify them, genetically modify them, and be more powerful, and put them back in. That's kind of what that middle image represents there of a patient. And they go back in, and then they kill the cancer and completely clear it out. All the way in remission, doesn't come back because you have the cells now to fight this cancer. You can get another kind of cancer, of course, but let's be positive, right? So is you're getting rid of the cancer and it's gone. And so right now, the bummer, of course, is that it's very expensive, but with all medicines, it gets cheaper over time, right? And so this is very exciting because it applies to all autoimmune diseases, right? So this can be lupus, this can be some forms of Crohn's disease. These are things where your body's attacking itself because they've lost the ability to regulate, and you can give them back the ability to regulate and fix those diseases. And then regenerative medicine and growing organs, or 3D printing organs even, which we do. It doesn't look like the Lego stuff, but it looks like as gross as you think it might look. So when you're growing the organs, that's a heart in that image. We can grow those. We can't grow all of them, but we can grow livers, hearts, eyes, and skin, and a handful of other organs I haven't memorized. But the idea is this will reduce organ shortages. This will allow people to receive organs quickly. They'll be in a fridge in a hospital ready to be delivered into a person, right? This is today. This is like at UCLA. This isn't in some secret lab somewhere. And your protagonist can be doing this as their casual job because it currently exists. It doesn't have to be the special focus of the story, right? So how am I doing on time? Sorry to ask, but I forgot to time myself. We're doing good, okay. So these are the big four I want to highlight. There are a lot of things like this that are happening today that we just don't ever talk about because it doesn't come up unless you have a relative or somebody who's been affected and needs this kind of a treatment. So I thought when I was doing my failed plane landing, how do I make this not a utopia that's boring to talk about? And I started thinking about, I currently do, from my previous talks here, have had the opportunity to consult on some writing projects that people are working on. And so I've taken those and put them in here as examples. And so there's a handful of archetypes, and the writer really just wants to explore the archetype, and they've developed some kind of premise to do that. And I will nudge them towards one of these premises, which sets science up as a background without making it the focus and or disaster of the film. And so I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I do like the idea of maybe just jumping down to the Rebel one, which I thought was a fun project. And the right column is just films for references that I was trying to pull from. Just we've seen the same story, just not with science. And so the Rebel one's fun. It's with somebody with a rare genetic condition, and then there's a cure for it, and they're going to be the first person to do it, and this catapults them into celebrity status, right? All those movies about musicians who are catapulted into celebrity status, especially at young ages, explore the same type of themes that that person would have. They get invited to talk shows. They're becoming the representative, the spokesperson for this company, and the kind of burden that comes with like losing your anonymity and growing, especially if it's a coming of age and you're growing through this experience. We were able to, well, I don't know where that story went, but the idea is you could use science as a casual background, show that science is good, it's made some very big breakthrough, and still tell the human story without making science the over the top focus of that story. The other thing that came up is people really love writing horror. And unfortunately, with horror, the inclination is that science is bad, right? That's how you get to horror. And so, again, this is a set of genres and how to maybe approach those with just science as a background and not as like the focus of the story, but still drives all of the human narrative of the story that you might want to explore. And in the horror scenario, it's about this is actually pulled very similarly from a movie called Oculus. And Oculus is psychological horror where this lady's having memories and they're not memories and there's a mirror that's involved and it's more fantastical and supernatural than it needs to be. Because we do memory implants currently in science, and they can have side effects of, bringing up memories that you forgot about that are darker that you don't want to remember, maybe suppressing them, or just bringing up memories kind of like the way ChatGPT hallucinates sometimes. The implants can do that as well, right? And they cause you hallucination problems. You can still create your psychological horror by using a real science that exists, still setting the background that we have this technology at our disposal, right? In a positive light. The same thing with like comedies. No, I'm not going to pretend I have a comedy idea. I'll move on. So these slides mean nothing. So the punchline here, and this will be the last one I show. The punchline here is, science, all you really want is conflict. And we do that usually by creating doom, but you can still do that with the handful of examples I was showing in the other slide, where you can create a conflict, whether it's ethical dilemma, whether there was an example I had in there where somebody's making the drug, but a corporation's trying to either prevent them from making the drug because it's going to hurt sales, or racing them to get it to market first, right? There's these scenarios you can create that are real, that we do in like law shows and we do in tech shows, but we just don't explore in science at all, that you can explore using these very realistic science concepts that exist. And then hopeful doesn't mean utopian, right? So I failed to land the plane the first time is because I couldn't figure out how to get around that. And so really, it's just a matter of we have real life advanced science already, just use those as a background for the story you're telling. And then you can avoid the utopia problem and still highlight science in a positive light. And then making science, I'll just highlight scientists as protagonists that are good, so I can see myself up there. And then ground sci-fi and real sciences. I think one of the things I had a tendency to do in my last talk was just talk about how we're very close to doing genetic manipulation that can make you Wolverine and we can heal people and things like this, and like trying to really sell like superhero concepts and or designer babies. And people like that. They thought it was exciting. But you don't really need to go that far. We have the real science I was telling you about that is today done in a lab down the block and not like in some secret far off future. And so that's good enough, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. Love the very concrete examples there. I mean, I think we're all taking mental notes like, oh yeah, that absolutely the tension, conflict, not doom. I love that. I forgot to mention, so we will be having time for Q&A at the end. So start thinking about your questions. And also for those of you on Zoom, you can submit questions through the Q&A icon. I'll remind you again as we get to the end. Next up, we have Amy Parish, and she will be talking about lessons from the Bonobo Sisterhood, Reasons for Hope. And so to show it full screen. Wonderful.
Sorry, just trying to make it close enough that you all can hear me. Thanks for being here tonight. I always love talking about bonobos. I'm a primatologist and a biological anthropologist and a Darwinian feminist, and I'll tell you a little bit about how those things intersect. This is a painting by an artist named Stephen Nash that hangs in the Darwin building at University College London, where I taught for some years before I moved back to the United States. And I would pass it every day on the way to my office. And I really liked it because it's sort of an alternative Garden of Eden with Darwin there in the corner with his notebook, kind of looking out on some of our primate relatives. There are about 200 species of primate in the world today, depending on how you classify them. And this is a good representation. There are some apes in there, like the orangutans and the gorillas. There are some prosimians, which are sometimes considered, primitive primates or somehow lesser primates, but the lemur people get really upset if you characterize them that way. They're a true primate. They live mostly in the island of Madagascar, which we know, of course, from the movies. The shafaka, which is the big lemur-looking thing that's sort of sitting upright on the tree, is a little bit out of scale, although in the past we did have lemurs that were the size of gorillas, and they were unfortunately hunted to extinction by humans. But otherwise, it's a very nice assortment. You see beside the orangutan one of the 8 species of gibbon. You can tell by their long arms and that they're a brachiator. I spent 2.5 years in a rainforest in Thailand studying white-handed gibbons. This is a different species of gibbon, but they're really cool and interesting. But today I'm going to be talking about how we relate to our closest living relatives. So this is another assortment of different primates. Of course, we are a primate. Linnaeus was brave for his time in the 1700s in putting us in the animal kingdom. That was pretty huge. He wasn't quite brave enough to put us in the same genus with chimps and bonobos, which are our closest living relative. I think that would have been probably a step too far in his time, but I think in our lifetimes, probably you will see that classification updated so that either we will be in the genus Pan or they would have to be in the genus Homo. There's just not enough different about us to warrant us being in our own genus. So I studied the bonobo, which is lesser known than the chimpanzee, but equally our closest living relative. They share 98.5% of our DNA. They only live in the former Zaire, now Democratic Republic of Congo, south of the Congo River. So they're very difficult to study in the wild. There are about 200 in the world. We used to say in captivity, and now we say under human care. So we have 200 in the world under human care. And I've worked with most of the world's population that is being cared for by humans. And there on the right, you see 2 of the bonobos that I worked with at the San Diego Wild Animal Park. They are no longer at the now it's called Safari Park, but they are at the zoo. So if you come to San Diego, you can see them there. Not these 2 particular ones. That's Vernon on the top. That's a very typical kind of position for his afternoon nap with one foot crossed over the other knee, and then he puts his hands behind his head and he takes a nice long nap. And then that's Lana on the bottom, who is now at the Cincinnati Zoo. And then on your left, you see a wild living bonobo in DRC. We don't know how many are left in the wild. The only kind of extensive census that was done decades ago by a Japanese primatologist who went through the forest by bicycle, asking villagers, how often do you see them, counting nests, things like that. At the time, he estimated that there were 40,000 bonobos in the 70s. It turns out he made a mathematical error. So when he was asked to recreate that figure in the last decade or so, and he went back and looked again, he realized that he was off and that there might have only been 14,000 back then. So we're under 10,000 now. And one of the really big threats to them, well, there are 2. bushmeat, so hunting and eating them, which is really a bad idea in terms of epidemiology. It's like cannibalism to eat something that close to us. And it's probably how we did acquire HIV from other primates, chimpanzees and pseudomangabes. We don't know the exact route of transmission, but hunting, there's a really good case to be made that was probably in the process of hunting and eating them that we acquired HIV. Ebola can be spread really easily among the different primates. So it's a bad idea from that perspective to eat them, and of course also for many other reasons. And then also mining. So we're mining minerals for our cell phones and our computers, a mineral called coltan, out of those forests. And the companies are bringing in people from other areas that don't have traditional taboos against eating the primates. The people who've lived with the bonobos for centuries believe that the bonobos embody the spirits of their dead ancestors and would not eat them. But when you bring in people from other regions, then they don't have those same taboos. So unfortunately, mining companies will arm their workers and tell them to go get their own food in the forest instead of feeding them. And then they also create routes out of the forest by creating trucking roads and things like that where you can send the bushmeat out. I realize this doesn't seem like reasons for hope, but I'm coming to that. Sorry. Sorry. So this is a display of all of the different great apes. So there are 4 African great apes, which would be humans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. That's a really famous chimp there on the bottom right. That's David Graybeard, who was one of the first chimps that Jane Goodall met and became friends with. And then we have also Asian apes. So we have orangutans and gibbons. Oops, sorry. Wrong way. And we still have a lot of traits that we share in common with other primates, including that our infants are often born with prehensile feet as well as hands. And so they can do things like this where they use their feet in a grasping manner, even though the toe no longer diverges. I'm sure the other primates, we look kind of disfigured in terms of what our feet look like, but they still have these capabilities, even though we have all of these kind of cultural overlays of things like the bottle feeding and the diapers and things like that. We share many more traits, I think, in common with other primates than things that make us unique. And of course, we're also a mammal, so we're designed to have a relatively few number of babies over a lifetime and to invest pretty heavily in each one. And when you get to the apes and then to humans, it's pretty rare to have multiple births. You usually have one baby at a time. And so it actually takes more calories to lactate than it does to gestate. And that's true for both humans and apes. And most ape species nurse for at least 4 years. Orangutans nurse for about 7 years. So when I had my son, I decided I would try to kind of follow that model. So he's online right now, so he's probably I didn't really pre-think that, but hi, honey. So of course we all know Jane Goodall and her work on the chimpanzees, which started in the mid 1960s in Tanzania. When she first went out to study the chimps, the Tanzanian government wouldn't give her a visa because they said it would be impossible for a woman to live in the forest on her own. And so she said, well, what if I bring someone with me? And they said, okay. And she brought her mother. It's fantastic. And after the first season, she said, you see, I can do it. And they said, okay. And so she's been in the field ever since. And now, even though she's in her 80s, she still goes to the field. And she started out really as strictly a scientist, really caring about the ecology and the behavior of chimpanzees. And in more recent years, she has branched out to advocating on behalf of lab chimps, circus chimps, chimps that are pets and things like that. And we owe a lot of our understanding of our own evolution to what we know about chimps. So she was the first to discover that chimps make tools, and we were supposed to be man the tool maker. Homo habilis was the first the first in the line of our genus that made tools, and that was supposed to make us really special. Whenever that happens, we like to move the goalposts so that like we're still special. So then we said, well, what really counts is using tools to make other tools. So we do that kind of thing a lot. It turns out they also use tools to make other tools. So it's very hard to find something that's truly unique that separates us from the other primates. This is a bonobo in a zoo in Germany. There are lots of zoos in Germany that have bonobos, and this is one of the zoos called Wuppertal, where I don't know if you can see in the picture, but there are two little heads there. So this female had twins, and that's really unexpected, really a rare occurrence. It was the first set of twins. Definitely born in Wuppertal, maybe born anywhere in Europe. And she was really surprised when the second one emerged. So she didn't really know what to do with it. She was putting it on her head, on her thigh. But they have really long arms. So she figured out a way to wrap her arm around both of them and then locomote just on 3 feet, or 3 limbs rather, which all chimps and bonobos and all primates have to do that when they have young babies. Even though they can cling, they still need support. And so it really slows down mothers. They're the last to come to food resources. They're the last to arrive at a location that the group has traveled to. And so there are really significant costs to motherhood that make it, a real asymmetry between males and females in terms of reproductive investment. So males are investing mostly in competition with other males, competition over territory, sometimes courting females, depending on the species, whereas females are investing a lot of their reproductive effort in the gestating and the raising of the offspring. This is a bonobo in San Diego. Her name is Callie, and when I saw her do that pose, I thought, oh, that's so human-like. Where have I seen that pose before? Well, almost any executive in America, and it looks so defensive, I think, but very, very similar. I think we see a lot of similarities between us and them. Here on the bottom, you have a picture of a gorilla. It's in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I'm blanking on the artist's name right now, but I can look it up afterwards. It's called Reclining Nude. And then on the top is Lana when she lived at the Wild Animal Park, kind of channeling that pose. Some things that are a little bit unique about us is we have a tendency to form pair bonds. It doesn't mean that they're lifelong, and it doesn't mean that they're exclusive, but it does mean that in every human culture, there's some kind of formalized cultural and social recognition of particular bonds between males and females. And that is rare among mammals. To even have males kind of permanently associated with the social group is the exception rather than the norm. This is a New Yorker cartoon. You've probably seen many things like this. They're almost always men, unfortunately, showing this kind of evolution from where we supposedly started to where we are now. I tried to look for one with women, and sadly, this is one that I found, which actually, in some ways, I mean, you could argue that, throughout history and across cultures, there's a marked disparity of power, position, and prestige between males and females on average, with males having more of it. And that's why it's important to learn about evolution, because there's actually a little bit of hope here. This is my son reading his board book copy of Origin of the Species. Because understanding our mammalian, our primate, and our human origins will help us to understand our adaptations. And so, as I say, we learned a lot from chimps. These are 2 chimps that Frans de Waal studied at the Arnhem Zoo in the Netherlands. They're in a coalition with each other. Their hair is on end. They are communicating with another male that they're in an alliance, and they will act together against him. This is a picture of bonobo female and her baby. In contrast, I know these images are cherry picked, but bonobos have a reputation of being the make love, not war species, the species from Venus, whereas chimps are from Mars. They resolve a lot of their conflict using sex, both in heterosexual and same-sex interactions. So they're all basically kind of bisexual, nobody's really exclusively one thing or the other. Let's see if I can, oops, it's not advancing. Why is that? Well. Well, I'll have our tech person come and I'll just tell you that bonobos have sex in a lot of different positions, particularly amongst the females. It's just not going anymore. Maybe if we escape and try again or something. Maybe it's frozen.
I believe that we're frozen.
Well, I can describe it to you then. Get ready. So I did have a video called Sex with Carrots, where it just kind of shows that the copulations are very short. They last on average 9 seconds. They're very matter of fact. There's not a lot of courtship around it. There's no foreplay. It's just you're eating your breakfast and you're having your carrots, and the female and the male kind of look at each other and they just sort of slide into this copulation, and the female doesn't even stop eating, for instance. Or bonobo females will embrace each other and they'll rub their genital swellings together with rapid sideways motions and something called GG rubbing. And males will do something called penis fencing, where they hang out of branches and rub their erections back and forth. And so it's true that they do resolve a lot of conflict this way, and that there's very little conflict between groups, partly because the females are sort of free to have sex with males in other groups without their own males stopping them or getting into fights with the males in other groups. So that's a really interesting difference. What it ignores is that females are pretty aggressive to males in their own groups. So one of my big contributions to the field was realizing that this is a species with female dominance. And that came as a big surprise because the females aren't related, and it's really unheard of in mammals for unrelated females to form bonds with each other and to cooperate for kind of joint goals. And so the spark of hope here is that knowing that our closest living relative can accomplish that gives us hope, I think, for the human feminist movement, because it's all about behaving with unrelated females as if they are your sisters, right? So power to the sisterhood. And I think actually this is probably a good place to leave it, and I'm happy to answer questions when we get to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That was a really sweet final image to end on, though. And then to wrap up with us is Randii Wessen, who's going to be talking about the future of U.S. deep space robotic exploration.
Well, they don't let me touch hardware, so I got to make sure this thing works. Down that one, or this one?
Yeah,
that one?
That one. Screen.
Sure.
And window.
Window. That one.
Yep.
Double click.
Yeah, and then go ahead.
Sure. All right. Hopefully that works.
There we go.
Oh, I did that. Okay, there we go. Okay. I'm going to do something completely different. So let's, first I want to explain something. My name is Randii with 2 eyes because I'm an identical twin. My friends call me Randii. But anyway, what I'm going to do now is just show you just some vignettes of a possible future and a hope for humanity in terms of how we move forward. Okay. I'm only going to go about 30, maybe 40 years in the future, because if you go too much further than that, it gets really to be very, very science fiction. So let's start. First, you got to leave the Earth. This is the actual footage, and it's a little bit slow and broken, but this is actual footage of what it takes to leave the Earth. There's a camera on the side of the Atlas V rocket looking straight down. I know you can't hear me or do that. You got the solid rocket boosters, and it illustrates how we do exploration, first of this system and then out to the next one. Phase 1 is we do swing bys. We just go by worlds to do the basics. How big is it? Does it have rings? How many moons? Phase 2 is now you're doing orbiters. So rather than doing atmospheric composition, you're doing things like weather and seasons. Phase 3 is your landers and sample returns. And phase 4 is you bring in humans, which I like to refer as wetware. Got hardware, software, and wetware. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory does not do wetware. Wetware is usually the exclusive domain of the Johnson Space Center down in Texas. What we're looking in this image is for the upper left-hand corner to go black. It means you're up in space. And what it really illustrates is it doesn't really take long to do that. It just takes a whole lot of energy. But here's where I embarrass myself. I was about 185 pounds this morning. For the Saturn V Apollo program, is about $1 million per pound. That's $185 million to get me up into space. Shuttle is about $100,000 per pound. Today's rockets are about $10,000 per pound. SpaceX with the Falcon 9s is about $5,000 per pound. And there's some people want to get to $100 per pound, which means all sorts of things happen. So now we're in space, guys. It just didn't take long to do that. What's going to happen is the space station is going to be coming down in 2030, not because we don't need access to people living in space. It's just because it's getting pretty old. It's going to be 40 years old at that point. And there are a number of private companies that are building space stations to take the place as NASA as the anchor tenant to actually get their astronauts going to these commercial stations. But since they're commercial stations, it means that they will have rooms for rent. So there will be hotels in space before 2030. The next thing, which is fun, is we have the Artemis program. We're going to try to put a colony in the south pole of the moon. So what that means for most of you folks here, you are the last generation of human beings to be able to say, quote, I remember looking up at the moon and remembering when there were no city lights on it. That's really what your life is going to be. So moving on, Mars is really a very intriguing place because first we thought it was dead, then we thought it was alive, then we thought it was dead, then we thought it was alive. It's a place that, though it's still really difficult to have humans living there, it's the one that's most easily habitable for us. Now, some of the things we do is we build landers and rovers because we're up to almost phase 3 of trying to bring material back. This is the Jezero crater where we picked the landing site for the Perseverance rover. And the reason why we did that is I'm going to focus in that little square there at the like 10 o'clock region. Now let's zoom into it. That's what it looks like close up. It looks to the whole world that it's a river delta that dried up. So not only do you have sediments there that are great for, containing organic material, stuff came down from the whole channel. So that's the landing site for the Perseverance rover. We're trying to get material back from Mars. So what the rover is supposed to do is, God, it's really breaky in there. I guess it's a bandwidth issue. That's the Perseverance rover. And what its job is, besides just sensing what's going on, is it does these core samples where it drills a hole, but it's not just drilling a hole, it's taking a core sample out of the bedrock. It then, in essence, ingests it. It puts it into a carousel that then rotates it underneath the vehicle. There's a second arm there that you don't ever see because it's underneath the vehicle that grabs that tube, which looks a lot like this, and I'll pass that around later. It takes the tube, and then we want to see if there's anything in it. So we move it over to where the camera is, and we're actually going to photograph the whole sequence of what's there, making sure you got the contents. Then we seal it, and then we take that one tube, and then we move it. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I call it the wine rack. We take this stuff, and we move it over to the side. We have 43 samples. 38 are going to be for rock samples. The other 5 are witness plates, where we'll just see, one has nothing in it, one has just atmospheric gases, just to get an understanding of what's going on there. That's step 1 for the sample return, just to understand if there really ever was life on Mars. Step 2 is this. Once you got the samples, you wait for the second mission to come down, which is not being funded yet. So this is probably in the 2030s. It comes down there near Perseverance, where we now drive up to it. Once we drive up to it, we now do this handoff where we take the stuff out of the wine rack and pass those tubes to the landing craft, which has a solid rocket in its body. So we pass those samples, we lock it up, and you don't want to light the engines when it's inside things. So you open up this thing like a coffin, and then you push it out like a submarine missile with probably CO2. You push it out, you light it, and that takes it up into orbit. Once it gets to orbit, we have the Europeans doing phase 3, where here's the sample, it's being released into Mars orbit. The Europeans are going to come by and they're going to ingest the whole capsule. There they go. So they basically swallow it up, and there's a rule that you have to break the chain. Whatever touched Mars can't touch Earth, and whatever touches Earth can't touch Mars, because I guess we've all seen the Andromeda Strain. And then this thing comes back home and drops it into Utah. Right now, missions 2 and 3 are not funded yet. I hope this is in the early 2030s, but it may go to mid to late 2030s, and we'll see where we go from there. Now, one of the fun things about Perseverance, we like tech demonstration stuff. We put a little baby helicopter named Ingenuity on this thing just to see if we could fly in another planet's atmosphere. And it's like 7,000ths of an atmosphere. We were supposed to last for a week. We went 3 years. We were supposed to do 5 flights. We did 72, went over 10 miles, flight time more than 2 hours, 22 miles per hour, and we got to 80 feet. Think of an 80-story building. Now that we know it works, we're going to up the game. We're going to build something larger. There's a thing called Mars Chopper. This bad boy, 6 rotors with 6 blades each, carrying 11 pounds of science, goes 2 miles every day when the rover normally did like a football field every day. And it's the size of an SUV, and you think about the places we'll be able to traverse. Can you picture going into Valles Marineris, which is a Grand Canyon that would stretch across the United States with 3, 4, 5 mile high cliffs, and you can go down the sides of these things because most of the atmosphere is in the canyon, looking at the stratification of the rocks, maybe see a femur hanging out. Oh God, that'd be great. Eventually to do this, still on Mars. And Mars isn't too bad. By the equator, you could be on the surface with your shoes and socks off. It'd be about 40, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But then your knees might be at 0, your waist might be at -10, your head might be -40. So you have the same rule with like fire drills at Mars. If you're there, lay down and roll. Now, we launched the mission, this guy. This is going to go to a moon called Europa, which is around Jupiter. So you see Jupiter in the background, it's solar powered. The weird thing about Europa is it's very, very smooth. It looks like a cue ball that someone took a black felt tip pen and drew on. And you go, why is it so flat? And looking at the density and other arguments, we think it looks like this. You've got tens of miles of ice crust encasing a liquid water ocean. And we believe that the amount of liquid water ocean under this ice cap is about equal to twice the amount of all water on the Earth. Now, if it's water, you know it's wet. If it's wet, it means you need an energy source to keep it that way, and organic compounds everywhere. And if you need energy, water, and organics, why wouldn't there be something fun in there? The question is, how do you get to it? Now, when we talked to the science community, we said, okay, guys, if you could explore anywhere in that ocean, where would you go? And we gave them 3 choices. Would you like to be on the bottom, you know, on the sea floor, and maybe you have hydrothermal vents? Would you like to swim in the ocean, or would you like to be by the ice-water interface? And of course, they said, we'd like to be by the ice-water interface because the hydrothermal vents will convect stuff up to the ice. The radiation will hit the ice and have things funneling down into the crevasses. We want to explore that. So we said, okay, how do you do that? And we came up with an idea. It's called Bruy. We went up to Alaska. We found a lake that was frozen. We pulled out an ice core. We put a camera in the bottom of the lake looking up at the hole. That's baby Bruy. It's the little guy. We turn it on. We put it in there. The cool thing about Bruy, it floats. So with its wheels, it drives along the bottom of the ice. Now, let's face it, you still have to go a 500 million miles out. You have to survive the radiation. You have to land neatly on Europa. You have to figure out how to go 10 to 20 miles through the ice. You got to figure out how to get power and commands to the vehicle. You got to figure out how to get data out of the vehicle back to Earth. But we're starting here. Saturn is a fun one. There are like close to 10 ocean worlds where you have these moons that have an ice crust with liquid water underneath. I mean, heck, Titan on Saturn, it's got a methane rain, but it looks like its crust and its water and its core rotate differentially. So it probably has methane oceans and then a subterranean liquid water ocean, and it just rotates on this thing. But Enceladus was cool about it. You've got these geysers happening all the time. Cassini actually went about 50 kilometers through those plumes. We call those passes the Cassini car wash. But we want to get close because the light stuff goes high, the medium weight stuff goes halfway, the really good stuff is low. The really good stuff is the amino acids and proteins if they're there. So the trick is how to get into these vents. Some people want to land right next to the vent. That's the science community, but the engineers are scared silly about that. So they'd like to be like 10 kilometers away from a vent. But one idea we're working on is this. This is called eels. You land near the vent where the engineers feel it's safe. You've got a cable with a snake-like robot that has different segments, and each segment counter rotates, and it crawls along the surface. Its head has all the sensors, so it can sniff where the vent is. And then once it sees it, it starts going in, pushing against the sidewalls as it tunnels down into the crevasse. And to show you that this is just not an hallucination, we're actually building and playing with these things now. Finally, what everybody cares about is looking for planets around other worlds, because it's not just finding planets in solar systems, you're looking for life. And are we alone? Right now, the way it works is we have not detecting planets. There are over 10,000 exoplanets detected. Since we're a little squirrely kind of guys and we want to make sure it's correct, we go, first we detect it, and then someone else has to confirm that those are indeed worlds. Right now, we're up to about almost 6,000, and these numbers keep changing daily, so this is kind of old. We're up to like over 4,000 solar systems out there, and now we believe that every sun in our galaxy has at least one planet, probably more. So if they're, depending on how you count, 200 to 400 billion suns in our galaxy, there are hundreds of billions, if not trillions, of planets to explore. We're just working on this one. And what we're trying to do is really find out the whole zoo, using your word, of planets out there. We have these things called hot Jupiters. Picture something the size of Jupiter that could fit 300 Earths. That's so close to their star that their year is 4 hours long. It's nuts. There's a reason why I call them hot Jupiters. Another weird one, there are some gas giants that actually get expelled from their solar system and they just quietly float through interstellar space, not bound to any star. But since gas giants give off more energy than they receive from the sun because of the collapsing of the helium, these could be warm worlds that just never see sun. They're probably like my skin color. But okay, anyway. And then based on density, we see things like this, where we're convinced these things are ocean worlds, that they're just full of water. And again, if you have water and it's wet, you need an energy mechanism. Could you have life on these worlds? The challenge with these problems is if you look at the amount of light that comes from the star versus what's reflected off the world, it's 10 billion times brighter. So you go, okay, 10 billion, that's a big number. What does that mean? We think the task of seeing exoplanets directly with your eyeballs is like trying to see a firefly next to a lighthouse when you're a mile away. And then because of zodiacal dust in our system and probably in that system, you have to do this on a foggy night. So one of the ideas that we're working on is basically building a big thumb to block the starlight so you can see stuff near it. We had to hire an origami expert to help us with this. This is Starshade. You got the telescope, it then does 2 deploys. You then send it, depending on what you're doing, like 10,000 miles away from the telescope, and you line it up where it slides in front of the field of view of the telescope, blocking the starlight from the planets, from the stars, so that you can directly image planets around other star systems. So you can see what gases are there, if they're biogenic. What you can do is you can find terra novas, the new Earths, because we're slowly trying to move out of this world to the next. Why do we do this? One, because we're curious. 2, because by understanding other planets, you can understand Earth better. And then basically technology droppings. Look at anybody that was alive in 1925 versus 2025 and ask yourself, how did we get here? And it's because of stuff learning. You know, if you want to close NASA, fine. But as long as you keep learning as a species, that's what we have to do. And it doesn't matter whether it's biotechnology, primates, anything. We have to keep learning as a species and learn to work together. I'm going to end now with a set of images. On the left, that's the image of the Earth seen from low Earth orbit. The one in the middle, you're seeing the Earth as seen from the moon. The view on the right is taken from the surface of Mars from a rover, and I'm going to help you here. There's a white dot in that circle. That's Earth as seen from Mars. And finally, that's Saturn. You're looking at the night side, so the sun's into the wall here. You're 1 billion miles away from the sun. And again, we had to punch it up. Where that circle is, the dot in there, that's Earth from 1 billion miles away. I'm going to close now with a quote by one of my heroes, Konstantin Edvardovich Tsiolkovsky, a Russian, one of the fathers of astronautics. The Earth is the cradle of the mind, but one cannot live in the cradle forever. Thanks, guys. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Randy. So we're going to be moving to the Q&A now. Again, folks on Zoom, you can use the Q&A icon to submit questions. There's a microphone right over there if you guys want to line up for questions. And if you all want to join us at the table, that'd be great.
Do we keep our computers on, or how do you?
Oh, I.
Okay, all right.
Before we get to questions, let's give them a round of applause for some really inspiring talks. Thank you. All right, and we have our first question.
Hi, I'm Melody Cooper. First of all, thank you so much for encouraging us to look at things from a different perspective and to look at different horizons. And oh, by the way, I was in Rwanda and had a chance to spend time with the silverback gorillas. And I was studying the genocide for something I was writing, and one of the mothers had her baby on a vine and started swinging it. And I just started crying because anyway, what you were talking about was great. I have a kind of a two-part question. The first part is about, Travis, when you were talking about the positive ways to see science in our stories, it occurred to me that that's about the stories and the plot a lot, but that one of the things as writers, we try to create compelling characters, and that's how people really are drawn to story. And that one of the things, I made a little list, and I want to hear from all three of you, but what we don't see in scientists often is like that they're sexy, or that they're social, or they're spiritual, religious, or that they are female or people of color. So I wanted to know from each of you, from your different perspectives of scientists, what you would like to see in stories from the characteristics of scientists.
Yeah, I think kind of, I'm a scientist and
You're sexy.
yeah, I was trying to think of the joke. I couldn't do it. But thank you for jumping in. But I think the idea is that they're just regular people. I think they're, I think especially when I'm helping to review writing projects, there's all this jargon, and I don't talk in jargon, and we don't talk in jargon when we're working on anything. Like, all those terms exist, they're in textbooks, but we just say English when we talk to each other about planning studies and experiments. And on top of that, we all have kids, and we all do hobbies, we watch movies. We're not like Neil deGrasse Tyson, analyzing movies and criticizing them. We're also just entertained by watching movies. So I think just making them more like regular people is really the goal. They're not all like Aspergery or anything, the way they're often portrayed.
Right. Yeah, as you were giving your talk, I was thinking about the movie Day After Tomorrow, which I was just rewatching, and I was thinking that the way that the scientists are portrayed in that actually really does humanize them, and they are people who are parents and they're friends, and they are very humble, and they do a lot with a limited budget. And I was thinking that I wish more people could watch that movie right now and understand how much scientists invest, that it's not just some kind of elitist thing where people are wasting their time all day and, doing things that aren't worthy of a paycheck. So in terms of who I'd like to see in science, obviously, seeing more women and people of color, I think would help to flesh out kind of the depth and breadth of what we can learn from science.
Okay. I'd like to see us portrayed more as people. At JPL, it's 30% female. My assistant project scientist on Voyager was a bishop in the Mormon Church. And, it's like you can resolve the science and the religion and the spirituality. If you think about it, science is this internally self-consistent house of cards. There's stuff outside of that you can't use science to measure. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means just don't use science to explain it. We have softball games. We pull great tricks on each other. We're just like everybody else with just a nerdy vocabulary. I mean, that's really what we are. So portray us as people. We have flaws. We petty. We argue about stuff. We have people that are egotistical. We have people that do mean things to people. We have people that do good things to people. We're people.
Your
Science that
average
way.
primate.
Yes. And my dad is a scientist, so I just have one more little tiny question for Randii. What do you anticipate might be the protocols around finding life?
Finding life. First of all, when everybody says that we found life, we just covered up because society isn't ready for it. The Allen Hills meteorite was a meteorite found in Antarctica in 1984. It had signs of life in it. We now believe it's not. That rock was worth $200 million a year to NASA because people want to now start doing routine Mars missions. If we found life, one, do you really believe we could keep it a secret? And number two, do you really think we'd want to? Our budget would go through the roof. So I think when anybody finds something, it's just going to be all over the place. The problem with people is a thing referred to that I think you alluded to, which is called the mediocrity principle. We're the center of the universe. No, we're out in the suburbs. Well, our sun is special. No, it's just a G2. Well, life is special, and we're going to find microbial life in there. And we'll go, well, of course, life is out there, but multicellular, we'll find multicellular. You go, well, of course, it's multicellular, but it's not intelligence. And we'll just see how long we can hold on to this. So I think in terms of protocols, if we find conclusive evidence, because right now people are crying wolf all the time with almost things, that's not going to cut it. We need something real, and it really should be multicellular, because if it's just, we found mold, people get excited for a day and a half and then they're done, unless it's something different kind of mold. But I think it'll be released and people are just going to go nuts. When you mean like keep it in captivity or pith it, or or what?
Under human care.
I wouldn't use the word care, Right, we would. There'd have to be a whole, right, there's a whole protocol, and, is it infectious? I mean, we have no antibodies to this thing, so there's a whole lot of issues. That's why they put the astronauts in, motorhomes for a week and a half just to see, what grows. They quarantine them.
Great, thank you. Next question, please.
This might be actually a little bit beyond the scope of tonight, so tell me if what I'm asking is unrealistic. But I think I kind of came here tonight, both as a writer and as a human being, with a hope that you might give us a little bit of a sense of what the future really is going to look like most realistically, like and I'll say the near future, not the distant, because I think that's probably unrealistic to predict too far ahead. But what kind of an impact is science probably going to have on us in the near future? And the second question is, do you think that science can help save us from ourselves? They're two separate questions. Where are we probably going? And can science really help avoid some of the fears that we all have? I mean, I'm filled with fear and hope, but I'm hoping you guys know this better than I do.
Yeah, I would say I can speak from just in terms of like the health perspective. The diseases that we have now, and very soon, very near future, less than 100 years, we won't have any of those diseases anymore. And I think aging will be characterized as a disease. And so I think the idea, we're already working on prolonging life. We've already
And
found
just
that.
about how long of a time do you think before aging can be cured? I mean, for our kids or for us?
I think it's probably for your kids, grandkids.
Or grandchildren, okay.
Yeah.
Jeez, okay.
It's a little far off. I mean, there's a limitation. So our cells naturally can only so there's something in our system called a telomere, and about 122 is when you exhaust that thing, and your cells can't divide without that thing. And so there's an inherent limit. So like you usually shouldn't see somebody living past 122. Already we see a lot more people who go for like the Guinness World Book of Records. It used to be like they lived to like 102 years old and it's a big deal. There's people living 110 all the time now, right? And so I think the idea is 122 we kind of know is roughly the limit, and it's around getting past that, which I think this organ growing and these things where we can actually change the type of cells the organs are made out of is kind of the key to getting there if we want to do that. Your other question is, no, humans are inherently bad, right? So I think if we live longer, we're just going to do worse things.
So you're saying science can't save us?
No.
Okay.
Mic drop. Yeah, I would say.
I'm not sure if there's a point in answering the question now, but go ahead.
I think, humans are incredibly bad at paying short-term costs for long-term gain. We just never evolved to be able to do that. And so there has to be such an insane ratio of what that long-term payoff is going to be to even tolerate a really minor short-term cost, that we're going to have to figure out how we can work with the psychology that we have in some way to either trick people or to give some kind of really long-term perspective on long-term payoff that will make people pay short-term costs. But it's very, very daunting and pretty bleak.
I agree with Travis in the sense that science is really not going to help us. What we need to do is grow up as a species. Right now, we will destroy every resource and just use it till depletion and then wonder why we don't have it rather than managing it. We argue about melanin content. We argue about imaginary lines in the sand or which major deity you care to worship. That's what we fight over. We just can't do that and actually be a self-sustaining species. I think the most important thing you can do as an individual, a nation, or a species is to learn. And learning is broken up into two pieces: research and exploration to get the information, teaching to pass it on. And nothing personal with you guys. There's no reason why an actor should be paid gazillions of dollars and a teacher should struggle to get a salary when they're training the next generations. And until we get our priorities fixed, and unfortunately we only learn by devastation, by something bad happens before we grow up, there may be some of that in our future before we actually grow up.
And I will say there is a lot of data that women are more likely to invest in the future and invest in the community than are men. And I know that's a generalization, but there is a lot of data. And so the more women we put in leadership roles.
There's a story that says if you give a male head of a family of $400, they're going to use it for drugs, gambling, and sex. You give it to a female, it goes to clothes, food, and education. So more women.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we take another live question, is there anything from the Zoom folks?
Yeah, there's actually a few.
Okay.
We'll take one. So this is kind of a long one. I'm going to try to read it. Is the detection of free oxygen in the atmospheres of exoplanets the only way to detect life there? And is it possible to search for evidence of life that isn't based on organic chemistry, i.e. carbon, oxygen, and or water? Basically, what is the definition of life?
I got a real simple answer. We don't know. First of all, free oxygen is not the way to go. We really look for biomarkers, which are things like ozone, O3, methane, chlorophyll would be really way cool. But that's life as we know it. And the challenge that we run into is when I was in school, you had plants were the primary producers, animals eat the plants, animals eat the animals. We went to McDonald's. That was the food chain. And then in like 1977, by the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, they found organisms living off of heat, which they now call that pyrosynthesis or chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. If you're a physicist, energy is energy. Why not acoustic synthesis? Why not magnetosynthesis? So you really have to open your mind up. Now, I do believe that water will be the solvent of choice for any life form that we find, because hydrogen is the most common element, followed by helium, which is boring, and then hydrogen. So waters and alcohols. So there'll be great parties throughout the solar system. And as for carbon-based, yeah, you can have silicon-based life, but the sun, through its genesis, makes more carbon than silicon. So why would life choose silicon, which is rare, when carbon is more common? The question is we don't have a good definition for life, and I'll end it with this statement. We know eukaryote cells with organelles and stuff, that's definitely alive. Prokaryotes, bags of goo like an amoeba, that's alive. Viruses that need your machinery to make more of itself, I kind of think that's alive. And prions, which are just bloody molecules, I'm pretty sure isn't alive, but we don't know where that transition is. And there's a great line by Chris McKay that goes, when does chemistry turn into biology? And we don't know where that line is.
Great, thank you. Next live question.
Have a couple questions. I hope that's okay. The first one is for Amy. Can you talk about more what you mean by Darwinian feminist?
Oh, sure. So the question is about Darwinian feminism. So really in gender studies departments and in biology departments or in animal behavior departments, we're asking a lot of the same questions. Who has power? How do you get it? What is it good for? And yet in academia, each discipline is really siloed. And so, you know, there's this idea that gender studies is just there because it's a politically correct thing. And you know, the gender studies people are very suspicious of biology because it essentializes male-female differences, which, I mean, it has in the past, but only the bad scientists do that. The rest of us are really interested in variation. So it's kind of a recognition that we could come together and inform each other and talk to each other from these different disciplines, and that there are a lot of really interesting things about variation that could help us to understand social dynamics so that if we want to change them, we understand how to model that and what examples there are that are already successful.
Okay, thank you. And then for Travis, could you talk a little bit more about memory implants?
So I guess I don't know what else to elaborate on, but
What are they and how do they work?
Oh, I see.
Good question.
Yeah, great question. I mean, yeah, a lot of times they're made out of plastics with just chips in the inside of the plastic. The memory plant, I don't do the science, so I don't know the details about how it connects to any neurological network of your brain. But the ones for memory, the idea is that they are trying to combat Alzheimer's using this in dementia. Using this, again, that would be one of our big hurdles with living longer, is overcoming the general degradation of the brain over time. And so I think the stimulation around doing these is all around memory for the most part. So their goal is to see if you can maintain memory capacity and regenerate memory that has been lost. Not even regenerating pieces of the brain, but finding that information and trying to bring it back to the surface, see if you can do recall. Beyond that, it's all about connecting to prosthetics. And so can you mimic the mind's ability to control aspects of, or things connected to the body?
Thank you.
Greg, do we have another Zoom question?
What is the impact of race on your studies or forecasts, if any?
Is that whose question is that?
I'm sure it's for anyone that may be relevant.
Oh, I would say there's no impact.
I would agree. Science really is colorblind. If you're good, you're good. Okay. And that's really how that works.
I guess for me, I think about medicine and how actually there has been a fair amount of racism in medicine in the past, the Tuskegee studies, the Henrietta Lacks and the stem cells and things like that. It's not that science doesn't have biases in it, but the great thing about science is that it's self-correcting through time. So somebody will come along and re-examine your findings, and we will make progress. So I think that there is hope in that regard.
I would
Thank you.
go back on my answer in terms of no, not that way, not that way, not that way. No. I was taking the perspective of just like the workplace, but in terms of like clinical trials or things for biotechnology, race plays a pretty big part in trying to evaluate drugs. And I think there's the idea that you use white male as the default for drug development, which is how we made all those mistakes when you try to expand drugs and then go into pregnant women. You almost never use pregnant women in clinical trials, but then they still want to take the drug, and then we find out that there's complications. So I think it plays a pretty big role in the way we design clinical trials. We are conscientious of it. We've just, through science, learned the best approach is to, save race for like phase 3s when you've already established all of your toxicology and other safety metrics in a generic population like white men.
Great. Next live question, please.
Hiya. First off, thank you for doing this. You guys are all super interesting. I could sit around and listen to you guys for hours. Second of all, two like minor things. Well, no, a minor thing and then I guess a major thing. First off, can you talk about more about those trailers that astronauts get shoved into when they re-enter? Because I don't know anything about that, and that sounds super interesting.
That basically we just didn't know. So when astronauts went to the moon, when they came back, they kept them in quarantine for 21 days, just because we just didn't know if they brought back any pathogens that we needed to worry about. We now know that isn't the case. And it would be really cool if they actually did, because that's another whole can of worms. But that was just because we just didn't know when we were playing it safe.
And when do we stop doing that? Do you know offhand or?
Well, you think of all the shuttle crews, they just landed and then, after the vehicle was safe, they just walked down the ladder and then just shook everybody's hands. So it was between Apollo and Space Shuttle that we stopped.
Okay. And then like my big question, I guess, is like a little bit of like politics. This anti-science movement, where do you see that like going, and how does that affect? How do you think that will affect the future of your craft, I guess?
Yeah.
Well, so let me take a shot with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the problems that we face is that people are, and I mean students, are being trained not how to think, but how to take a test. And that's really, really bad. We also have the wrong incentive mechanism in place, because getting something wrong isn't bad as long as you learn from it. When we had the first administration of somebody that's right, I had to argue with people. They were talking about alternate facts. There is no such thing as an alternate fact. As an example I said before is, if I say there are 10,000 people in the front lawn of the White House, that's a fact. It's based on an observable. If I say it's the largest of all time, I'm saying, hopefully it's based on facts, that you're looking at other facts, other observables, and saying, yes, it is the biggest. Saying that there's alternate facts is doing a disservice and teaching people how not to think. When people don't know what a theory is versus a hypothesis, you gotta get people to learn and to think critically. When someone says something, just don't take it on face value, whether it's MSNBC or Fox or whoever, or if it's a political leader. Think about it. Look at alternate sources. Look at some range of information. Just don't get it from one stovepipe, because it's just going to bias you.
We'll go reverse order. Go ahead.
Chicken.
Yeah, it's interesting. America is one of the very, very few countries in the world that still thinks that evolution is up for debate. It's really astounding that people even have phrases like, do you believe in evolution? I mean, do you believe in gravity? It's like, this, Darwin's theories of evolution were, as profound as understanding, laws of planetary motion, something from Newton. I mean, it's just, it's really key to understanding where we've come from and where we might be going. And so it's a little discouraging that it's not taught better and that people aren't more informed. And it doesn't mean that Darwin was right about everything. Certainly in terms of sexual selection, there was a bunch of stuff that he ignored, like female-female competition and male-female competition and male choice, that maybe males could also be choosy and not just copulate with at every opportunity that came along. So there were some things he did get wrong, but also there was so much that he got right. And this idea that it's still somehow questionable that he that what he said was right is really kind of astounding.
Yeah, I think I was hesitant because, we in biology and biotechnology, we do make mistakes, right? We make drugs that turn out later cause cancer, or we've done the evaluation incorrectly on a certain subset of population. And so I'm not, I wasn't as gung-ho to jump in and say that you're wrong for thinking that you know better than science or something, because science, biology at least, we make mistakes because we're experimenting, we're still learning about the body, and we learn about proteins that we didn't know would have a cross reaction and stuff. So I was more hesitant to jump on it's inherently bad to question science. I think you should all, like, maybe the first answer is just be critical thinkers and always question, be skeptical. That's all science do. The whole field is just we question everything and we do experiments to figure out what's true. If you find a scientist or a person that you've learned to trust the opinion of, then follow that person and follow their opinions. But I would say always be skeptical if something sounds unaligned.
Oh. So how are we doing on time? Are we time for one more?
Two more. These are good questions, but we started a few minutes late.
Okay.
We'll take two more. Yeah. Well, I'll take one here, and then you can take one. So, what's one of your favorite science fiction movies or TV shows where you think they captured the power of science in a good way and showed protopia?
Can I make a plug for a show that I worked on last season? So yeah, if you have Apple TV Plus, For All Mankind is an alternate history show. Thank you. It's in its 5th season. It does not get as much promotion as certain other Apple TV Plus shows, but yeah, it's a show that's very science positive. Definitely plenty of stakes and drama. It's this alternate timeline. You sort of see what happens if the space race never ended. Lots of political turmoil, but it also shows that, hey, what a green future might look like if we had electric cars 10, 15 years before we did now. So yeah, just a minor plug for All Mankind.
That's great. I don't have quite an example of a sci-fi one. I think we always lean into the disaster sci-fi, and even when it is the positive sci-fi, it's stuff that doesn't quite reflect like something that's happening now or that's even accurate at all. I think my example would be Extraordinary Measures. It's this movie with Harrison Ford and Brendan Fraser. It's old now, but it really just represents what it is to try to find a treatment for a patient. And when like a scientist and an invested stakeholder, like a parent, really come together with money and drive and push the powers that be in the departments and the politics, like the local department politics aside to get science done. I think it kind of really represents what that looks like when you're trying to actively do that. It's not sci-fi or anything, but it is representative of what science looks like in my world. I want to take this as a quick opportunity to jump onto another misrepresentation of biology and science that I'm thinking about. It because Extraordinary Measures is pretty realistic. I find it interesting when you have a movie, and try to stop doing this if you can. If you have a movie where we're flying cars, people have jetpacks, and they're like teleporting. Oof, they're teleporting across town, but scientists are still like using pipettes and stuff in the lab. It makes it seem like those scientists are like in the Stone Age for with the rest of the technology. Like we use robots now in the lab, right? And so it's always funny that we're still using like the 90s representation of scientists in futuristic movies. That's it.
Yeah, I guess for me also, it's not a sci-fi film, but if you've seen Chimpanzee Empire, which I think is on Netflix, it's filmed in Uganda, and it's sort of that same thing that Meerkat Manor did in a way, where you kind of overlay real footage of animals with kind of a soap opera story. But in this case, it's all stuff that actually really happened in the group. So it's super dynamic. I think it's really going to make people care about chimps and want to conserve them. So it's really effective in terms of the storytelling.
I think one of my favorite science fiction movies that really gets it right is The Martian. Even though one movie that's really bad science, but I love it, is Armageddon. It's great.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. And I think this is probably our last question. Yes, go for it.
Hey, what's up? I don't need a mic. Can you hear me? Can I hear me? But then it's like really loud and weird. Okay, whatever. Thanks for talking. One of my favorite things about like watching a lot of like older sci-fi and reading older sci-fi is this forward-looking approach. You know, you look at like Asimov or Heinlein, even looking at future stuff. And even as forward-thinking and as possibly prescient as they are, they're still not able to think of certain stuff. I'm thinking of like in Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, you know, we've got Martians, we've got people here, but we also have like spying with actual tape. And like we have to go in every day to take the tape to recut. Like we can't think of digital storage as far looking as we're on. I'm curious if you guys, in watching modern sci-fi media or even anything else, if you're like, wow, we're still thinking about this stuff. We're not capable of looking into the future at all in this way. Things that maybe we're still kind of messing up a little bit because we're just not thinking far enough. We're not thinking widely enough. And it's cool if you're like, no, that's also fine. There's been a lot of questions. Thank you.
I honestly didn't understand the question. Sorry.
Okay, just like if there's like honestly, like along the lines of what you were talking about with CRISPR and stuff like that, things that as we're looking forward, we're not able to grasp on certain parts, right? And our minds might be a little bit different than like full-on scientific minds. So I'm just curious, when you guys are looking at problems or you're watching shows, or you're seeing things like in the future, they're doing jetpacks, but they're still doing pipettes. Things along that lines, I think is, you know, if that person hadn't asked that question, my question would be better.
Let me take a shot at this.
Yeah.
When you're writing a script on whatever topic and there's some sort of science or technology in there, take a look at what is currently done today and then figure out if you could do anything, what would be the next step? And just try to look forward, because it really starts with you guys in science fiction that becomes science fact. And there's a great quote by Robert Goddard, one of the fathers of astronautics, who said, the dreams of yesterday are the hopes of today and the realities of tomorrow. You guys are giving us the hopes of tomorrow. Think of all the stuff that was written in Star Trek and how much of that stuff is already here today. Keep doing that.
I think that's a great sentiment to end on. I'd like to thank our panelists. Also, thank you to Dwayne and Kelly Jo, the genre committee, Greg and the guild staff and all the volunteers for this wonderful event. And thank all of you for coming. Be hopeful, be skeptical, be curious, and we're all excited to see the futures that everyone creates. Thank you so much for coming.